Hello, welcome to a new segment of LogosTV, new program on Coptic life and civilization. I'm Michael Saad. Our segment today is another segment of and about Coptic monastic life. And our guest today is Professor Caroline Schroeder, Associate Professor of Religious and Classical Studies at the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California, and author of a book on monastic bodies, discipline and salvation in Shenoute of Atripe, our own Saint Shenoute. And if I start by welcoming Dr. Schroeder, thanks to accepting our invitation, graciously accepting it to appear on our program.
Oh, hello. Thank you very much for having me back.
Thank you. Your recent trip to Egypt just a few weeks ago is courageous. How did you dare to go to Egypt at this time to do work on Saint Shenoute of Atripe in Sohag? What was it worth it?
Oh, absolutely. It was the trip of a lifetime, Michael. I'm so glad I went. You know, there's been a lot of, press about problems in Egypt right now. And I know your viewers are probably all, think a lot about their friends and relatives who are in Egypt if they are living somewhere else. And I have to say, I did not feel in danger at all when I was there. I went to Cairo and spent a day in Cairo and then went down to Sohag. When I was in Cairo, I had a few extra hours and managed to sneak over to the pyramids for a trip. The pyramids are always fun to visit. And one thing that made me really sad actually was that there's been so much negative press about the situation in Egypt right now that there are very, very few tourists. And so, I think I may have given you some photographs from when I was there, and there's really nobody in the background because there's nobody there. And so it makes me sad for the people of Egypt because I know how important the tourist economy is for Egypt. So I hope people will go to visit and put more money in the economy. So I was just in Cairo for a day, and then I went down to Sohag, and I met up with another couple of scholars who I traveled with, and that always makes it a little easier when you're traveling in a group than when you travel alone. The last two times I had been to Sohag, I went by myself. And I think right now, because of the situation there, I probably would not have gone by myself. But, I was traveling with a couple of friends. And so it was no problem. We flew from the Cairo airport down to Asyut. And there's a beautiful new airport in Asyut. There's also a beautiful new airport in Sohag. I have not visited the airport in Sohag because there weren't that many flights, and so the time didn't quite work out for the days I needed to go. But it's beautiful, modern. It's a small airport, but it's a beautiful, modern airport in Asyut. And then spent several nights at the guest house at the Red Monastery. As I'm sure you know, there are a number of new guest houses at some of these monasteries now. Accommodate visitors, and it was quite comfortable and quite nice.
Welcome back, and we look forward to hearing more stories in detail about each of your visits. I know this was your third visit to the White Monastery to continue your research on Saint Shenoute and his monasteries for men and women in the Sohag Akhmim area. I'm also curious about, to learn from you, what is the stature of Saint Shenoute in world Christianity?
In world Christianity?
Yes.
Well, that's a great question. As you know, some of your viewers might know, Shenoute isn't mentioned in the Greek and Latin sources from antiquity, from early Christianity and the Middle Ages, but he was obviously very, very important in Egypt. And it's now in the past, say, 10 to 20 years, historians of Christianity have become aware of just how important Shenoute was in Egypt and how important his writings are for our understanding of what was going on in Egypt in the 4th and 5th century. Really, you know, we have no other collection of materials from an early monastery like the monastery at Shenoute. I mean, really, his writings are unique because they provide a real window into what life was like in a monastery in the 4th and 5th centuries. And we just don't have that kind of collection from anywhere else. I mean, sure, we have some material from Basil and Gregory and the Cappadocians, and we have, you know, some material from Augustine and Cassian, you know, some other Latin writers also, but nothing on the scale and scope of Shenoute's writings. So church historians are becoming more aware of Shenoute as more people are writing about him and how important he is for our understanding of the history of Christianity and the history of Egypt.
That's wonderful. You recently spent time in Germany at the George August University in Göttingen.
Yes.
And to do research still on Shenoute or something else, and what are the details?
Well, thank you for asking. I had a wonderful time in Germany. And actually, if you have any viewers in Germany, I did get a chance to visit the nearby monastery there. There was a monastery about an hour or so away from where I was living in Göttingen. And I can't remember the name of the little town that the monastery was in, but they were just very, very wonderful hosts.
Is that a Coptic monastery of Saint Anthony?
You know, I don't remember. I'm
but
sorry.
It is a Coptic monastery.
It's a Coptic monastery.
Okay. Under Bishop Damian.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And so, anyway, so I was at the university in Göttingen for a year for my sabbatical at the Department for Egyptology and Coptology there. That university is one of the, you know, best places in the world to study Coptic, and there are a number of people there working on Coptic, some students and a professor, Heike Belmer, who is very famous for her work in Coptic. And I was there working primarily on Shenoute. I'm writing a book right now on children in early Egyptian monasteries, in early Coptic monasteries. So I was there working on children in Shenoute's monastery for that year.
Wow, that's a groundbreaking thesis.
Thank you.
Right, isn't it?
Yes.
And we look forward to reading your new book. And I understand you were, during that year, you were under a grant from, or a scholarship grant from a German organization?
Yes, the Humboldt, Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. And yes, I had a fellowship from them. And then my hosts were Heike Belmer and her colleagues at the university.
Is that foundation related to the Humboldt University in Berlin?
You know, that's a good question. They're both named after the same Humboldt brothers. So yeah, there were two brothers, and Alexander was one of them. And yes, they're both named after the Humboldts. They were very important people in German history, and Alexander von Humboldt was very important for German education and universities.
The university founded in his name, or in the great-grandfather's name in Berlin, still interested in Coptic studies, I understand.
It is. There are people who work on Coptic there, and actually I will be at Humboldt University in May to work with a colleague in the Institute for Linguistics and German Language at Humboldt University, because we're going to be starting a new project on Coptic linguistics and developing a database of some of Shenoute's writings. So yes, there is very much still Coptic alive and well at Humboldt University in Berlin also.
Wow, we need a special segment of this program to talk about centers of Coptic studies in Germany, and we will be honored if you would be our host in that segment.
Well, thank you. We can talk more about that.
Right. You are currently teaching religion and classics, perhaps, at University of the Pacific. Would you kindly enlighten us with information about courses you teach that have Coptic component, even 2-3 lectures in a big semester course?
Absolutely.
Yeah, what are the such courses over the last several years?
Yes. Well, right now I'm teaching 2 courses in which some Coptic materials play a role. I teach a course on the New Testament and Christian origins, in which we read the New Testament, but we also read other texts that were written in the 1st and 2nd centuries, including the Nag Hammadi Gnostic texts like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Mary that survived to us in Coptic. And these are very, very important texts for understanding early Christianity, even though they're not part of the New Testament canon. And so we talk about the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, and how important the manuscripts are. We even mentioned the Gospel of Judas. As you know, there are new Coptic texts being discovered all the time, and or translated. And so there's, even though these are very old things, there's always something new in Coptic studies. So we talk about them in my New Testament class. In my class right now on women in Christianity, we read some of the sayings of the Desert Fathers, and including the Desert Mothers, like Syncletica or Amasera. There are important sayings from the Desert Mothers in that collection. And we read in a history of Christianity class I teach, we always read the life of Anthony, because the students love the life of Anthony, and it's a really great window into early Christianity and how important Egypt was to early Christianity. As you probably know, the life of Antony was one of the most popular books in antiquity. It very quickly became translated into many, many languages. And so the lives of these and teachings of these Coptic monks were really important for Christians all over the Mediterranean world in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th centuries. So we always read that. And then my students often do projects in my History of Christianity course, and there are a number of resources they use. And one of the resources that I try to point them to is actually the Coptic Encyclopedia, which is now online at Claremont University. And I know you were involved, Michael, in getting the Coptic Encyclopedia online. And it's such an important encyclopedia because it has articles on all sorts of topics, and then the bibliographies for those articles are really important, especially for students. They can then learn about, they want to know, okay, who was Amma Syncletica? So I just mentioned, the sayings of the Desert Mothers, and they want to know, well, who was Amma Syncletica? Then they can go to the encyclopedia and look up Syncletica, And then also they can see in the bibliography for the article if there have been any other books or articles written about Syncletica, and so they can learn then even more.
Would they write a term paper, for example, or a little research project for a senior thesis or master thesis?
Yes, my students can write their term papers on any topics that they choose. Yes.
Right.
So yes, they could certainly choose to write about a Coptic topic.
We have quite a number of Copts studying at the University of the Pacific from Northern California and also from Southern California. They spent undergraduate or master's degree there, College of Pharmacy, and perhaps they can take such classes as either as major or minor or elective.
Absolutely.
Right.
I've had a few Coptic students in my New Testament class who they're not majors in religious studies, but they were just interested in the topic, and it was a good elective or general education class. Many of our classes fulfill general education requirements that students have to take, and so I get a number of students who are not majors who need a course in a certain area, and so they take one of my courses on Christianity or the New Testament.
Wow, it's fascinating. I wish I'm an undergraduate student one more time in my life to benefit from all of this wealth of information and capable supervision by the professor. You mentioned two books in your last answer, and one of them is The Life of Antony, and there are many versions of The Life of Antony. If you go to Amazon.com, the one I prefer and appeared several years ago is a translation, first time ever, from Coptic language direct to the English language.
Mm.
And yes, because it has been translated before from Greek
right.
to English or from Latin to English, but never from Coptic to English until Professor Tim Vivian of California State University in Bakersfield, California, translated the Coptic text into English. And in this book, look for Life of Antony and say, for example, at Amazon.com, and the translator is Dr. Tim, T-I-M, Vivian, V-I-V-I-A-N. And also it's joined with a translation from Greek to English of the same text. So one page here is Coptic to English, the same page, corresponding text from Greek to English. So it's a very interesting, and for the first time ever, also a letter of the disciples of Antony by Serapion of Timaeus, and he was a disciple of Antony and wrote about him. And the second thing you mentioned, Dr. Schroeder, is the Coptic Encyclopedia, and thank you for mentioning that it is now available online at Claremont Graduate University. Just Google Claremont Coptic Encyclopedia, it will show. Or when you are searching for an article, say about Saint Shenoute, you Google Shenoute Claremont Coptic Encyclopedia, the article will appear and will give you more details. And actually, I wanted to ask you, in general terms, what is being done about Saint Shenoute worldwide today in terms of what do we expect in the next few years to see in terms of publication?
Oh, great question. Well, so in terms of publications about Shenoute in particular, there should be in the next year or two a translation by David Brackey and Andrew Chrislip of some of his sermons and writings into English. There are always, scholars who are publishing a few articles here and there. And then I hope to have a book on children that will be about Shenoute and other monasteries in the next few years. And then, of course, Stephen Emmel, who is a professor of Coptic and is a very important scholar in the Coptic world. He and some other scholars are trying to produce an edition of all of Shenoute's works in Coptic with an English translation. And it's been, it's a very big project. So it's taken some time. And hopefully the first volume or two will be out in maybe, 2 or 3 or 4 years. That's the hope. So there, and then once those editions and translations are out, then hopefully more people will be able to work on Shenoute.
Professor Schroeder, thank you so much for such a wonderful segment, answering our questions and enlightening us about the life of Saint Shenoute, the Archimandrite, his monasteries in Sohag, the world attention to his legacy, and the prominence of this figure and leader of Coptic monastic life in the history of world Christianity. We spent an excellent time with Professor Caroline Schroeder of the University of the Pacific, where she is associate professor in the area of religious and classical studies, and also director of the Humanities Center, and be on the watch next segment of LogosTV program on Coptic life and civilization. Thank you for joining us.